Pre-infusion. This is a tough one because it's very subjective on the results you get from pre-infusion. But we'll go over the concept and how it's achieved on today's machines, and maybe a little bit of history, and then you can experiment for yourself to see if you have good results. So pre-infusion really is a result of some previous lever machines. So back in the dawn of time when espresso machines were made, big levers, you pulled these big levers down that compressed a big spring, and when that lever got pulled all the way down, it stayed in the down position. And when it was down, it opened up a water port, and water came into the coffee. And typically that was from a steam boiler that was about 1 to 2 bar. So the temperature of the water is 200, 250 degrees. And that water came in slowly at 1 or 2 bar. And when it filled up to a certain point, typically you would watch, and as soon as you saw some coffee coming out of the portafilter, you would release that big spring and put pressure on the water that was in there. When you did that, they would seal off the intake port and just take the water that was in there and force it through the coffee.
Okay.
So because it's a spring, springs work on, they have a certain amount of force depending on how far you compress them. So if you compress them a little bit, there's a little force. You compress them a lot, there's a lot of force. So when you compress that spring all the way, the first amount of pressure you have on that coffee is a lot. And as that spring expands, the pressure is decreasing as it expands. So you start with a great amount of pressure and you end with a low amount of pressure for a typical lever machine.
Okay.
So the E61 group also has mechanical pre-infusion, in that it operates the three-way valve. So in the off position, water is allowed to go through the exhaust from the coffee to the exhaust. When you put the E61 in the first position, right to there, it closes off the exhaust port and opens up the intake port, but does not turn the pump on yet.
Okay.
So it allows water to flow in through this area into the coffee at lower pressure than you would for brewing. And then you would turn the E61 to the second position, which then turns on the pump, and then it goes to high pressure. So there's some differences when we say low pressure, because there's no water being forced through, but there's some residual pressure inside the brew boiler that allows water to flow into the coffee. Not a whole lot, but enough to do some pre-infusion. Now, if this machine was hooked up to the water mains, then you would have water mains pressure as your pre-infusion pressure, because you turn it on to the first position, it opens the valve, allows water to flow at whatever your water mains pressure is through the coffee and out for your pre-infusion.
Okay.
There's tons of stuff on the internet about what pressure you should do at pre-infusion. It's everybody has their own opinion, let's say. So that's one way of doing it. This is a mechanical version where you press a lever to, in one position it allows low pressure, in another position it allows high pressure. High pressure is achieved from the pump, and low pressure is just achieved through either residual pressure in your brew boiler or a water mains pressure.
Okay.
Okay. There is one other way to achieve some low pressure, and that is with some pump control. So if you controlled your pump to turn on really low at the beginning and then high at the end, you could kind of control your pre-infusion. There's a couple commercial machines out there with variable pressure, not necessarily pre-infusion, but they call it pressure profile. So you can set your own profile, or you can create your own profile based on moving a lever or a paddle.
And that is controlling the pump at variable rates.
Correct. So you're turning on and off a pump.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say on and off, but you're controlling the pressure, the speed of the pump, which then controls the pressure also that the coffee sees.
Okay.
Now, so that's a manual valve, manual three-way valve that allows that to happen. And then you have electronic valve three-way valve that will do that same thing. And in this particular case, for electronic valve, you turn the valve on, and it would allow the hot water to go in from the boiler based, from residual pressure in the boiler, and do your pre-infusion, and then you would turn the pump on after. There are some machines out there that the pre-infusion is you turn the switch on, the pump turns on for a certain amount of time, then turns off for a delay time, and then turns on again for the remainder of the brew cycle.
And that pre-infusion then is at just the normal pump pressure?
Yes.
Or a combination?
It's a combination because it's very difficult to describe the pressure that the coffee actually sees. So let's take, for instance, a vibrating pump in a home machine. If you turn the pump on for just a couple seconds, the coffee doesn't see any pressure because it's not full of water yet in there. So if you just turn it on for 1 to 3 seconds, you probably be very low pressure in the coffee. It's in the portafilter itself.
Okay.
The portafilter needs to fill up with water before the pressure actually increases.
Okay.
So there's some time between when the pump turns on and when the coffee sees full pressure of the pump.
All right.
It's hard to describe, but
it sounds like physics to me.
Yeah, something like that.
Science. But then, there's the Breville dual boiler, which we talked a little bit about.
So, matter of fact, all the super automatic espresso machines also included.
Okay.
Control the vibrating pump in a manner where they can control the pressure, or actually they control the flow rate of the pump, which in turn controls the pressure. So they can turn that pump on so it just cycles a little bit, so they get a little bit of pressure or a little bit of water flow, and then they can use that for their low pressure pre-infusion.
Okay.
And then they can turn the pump on to full speed and have full pressure.
So it's kind of subjective about sort of the results and the purpose for pre-infusion.
I have seen a wide variety of results.
Okay.
From even pre-infusion for 1 second, and I've seen at a couple SCAA shows where there's a couple companies pre-infusing for 15 seconds at low pressure, and it's still brewing for 25-30 seconds for the full entire shot.
Oh wow, okay.
So it's 15 seconds of pre-infusion and 10 seconds for full pressure, and they're getting delicious shots. So it's all subjective, how you want to prepare your coffee, and your results may vary.
So one of the things that Brendan brought up that he had read, that it was maybe it's around blooming the coffee, allowing for the so it might actually could be something you would play with if your coffee was really fresh, right? Because you'd have a lot more CO2 in there, and so maybe a pre-infusion.
Possibly. It's really subjective. So.
Why you would do it?
But I would definitely experiment with it.
Okay.
Depending on your coffee, you could see great results.
Do you have any questions, Brendan?
Two.
Okay.
Does the type of pump you have affect your pre-infusion? Does pre-infusion work better with a vibratory pump or a rotary pump?
So pre-infusion necessarily doesn't matter what pump it is. It matters how much pressure is in the coffee. So typically when we say pre-infusion, we're talking about low pressure, 0 to 2 bar maybe, sometimes up to 5 bar depending on line pressure. But typically it's low pressure. So a rotary pump puts out high pressure as soon as you turn it on. However, there is a time lag when the water fills up in the portafilter. So as long as the portafilter is not full of water, the pressure will not rise to 9 bar, and you will have low pressure pre-infusion. But you have to make sure it doesn't get full, so it's hard to control that. So pre-infusion doesn't matter if it's a Vibe pump or a rotary pump. It all matters on how full the portafilter is during that pre-infusion phase.
Okay.
If you do have a pump that has some control on it, so you can turn it down, then as the water fills up in the portafilter, the pump is on low enough where it's still low pressure.
I see.
All right.
And do you have a second?
Yeah, if someone has kind of a designated extraction time that they have set, personally with their machine, and they want to try pre-infusion, should they be subtracting their pre-infusion time from that, coffee extraction time?
No, of course, you should experiment with all these, but typically you could keep the same overall brew cycle time. So if you like a 27-second shot and that's what you're shooting for, then keep it at 27 seconds, but you can turn it on for 2 seconds, turn it off for 2 seconds, and then brew for 23 more seconds.
I see.
So overall shot time's about the same. Your results may vary.
Unless you're crazy like the ones where they were doing 15 and then,
But still, they were maintaining a 25, 30-second shot, so
Okay.
it was pretty similar.
Cool. All right. Any other questions, B?
Not from me, no.
All right. Thank you very much,
All right,
Bill.
you're welcome.